Om Tadekam Smaramastadekam Hajamaha Tadekam Jagat Sakshi Rupam Namamaha Sadekam Nidhanam Niralambamisham Bhavam Bodhipotam Sharanyam Vrajamaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. On that alone do we meditate. That alone do we worship. To that alone, the witness of the universe, do we bow. To that one who is our sole eternal support, the self-existent Lord, the raft to safety across the ocean of this world, do we come for refuge. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning to all of you, and to all the fathers here, I wish you a happy Father's Day. And I think there's a little father and mother in each one of us, so we can rejoice in this special day of honoring our fathers. Today our topic is Taming the Fire Within. Thanks for the very appropriate and humorous and touching opening song. Taming the Fire Within. Now what fire are we talking about? What fire is this? Burning within? Why would I want to tame a fire burning within me? There's plenty of fires out there. What about those fires in the hills every summer? We want to put those out, definitely. And so many fires of conflict. Conflict in the family, conflict in the workplace, conflict in the Vedanta society. We want to put those fires out, definitely. We have to tame those fires. But fire within, that's my passion. That's what I live for, the inner fire. What do you mean taming it? Vedanta analyzes the suffering we get in life and finds there are three sources of suffering. They call it the three fires. The first, we can say, is other beings. We suffer from the actions of other beings, like mosquitoes, maybe rattlesnakes, mothers-in-law, annoying bosses, annoying colleagues. They all make us suffer, other beings. And that's a fire that we really would like to be able to put out. Second source of suffering is, we call it adhidhaivakatapa. It means fate, or something which is entirely out of our hands, like earthquakes, strikes of lightning, epidemics, tsunamis. These kind of things, we have no control over them, and no doubt we suffer from them. We'd like to have control, and we try to have control over these things, but early warning systems for earthquakes and all that, but let's face it, we can't do too much. Then there's the third fire. That is adhyatmikatapa, the fire arising from our own being. Like aches and pains in our bodies, we suffer from these. The body gives a lot of suffering. But more importantly, there's a fire of mental suffering that we feel within. Anger, unfulfilled desire, envy, these kind of things. And we suffer from these. Ordinarily, we feel like the suffering comes from outside. If I feel angry, well, that's because of what someone else did. That's why I'm suffering from this anger. But actually, the Vedanta will say, and that's what we're going to look at more today, that fire is within you, and that is the only fire that we actually have some control over, that we actually can address, is this suffering that arises from within. So this fire, we can say this inner fire in which we are burning, they have a very nice saying, a way to call it this, they call it the 6 enemies The 6 enemies, the passions. What are they? Lust, anger, pride, delusion, I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget. Greed, that's the one I'm forgetting, see? Greed, infatuation, pride, envy. These 6 enemies, why are they enemies? Because they hamper us in life, especially in our spiritual life. In our spiritual life, there are obstacles to our moving forward. So that's why I'm suggesting that we might want to look at it. Now, we as spiritual seekers, and I think all of us here are spiritual seekers, we have envisioned for ourselves a state of perfection in which we live in harmony with others, in which we can love everybody, in which we don't get angry, we immediately forgive everybody. Anyone who insults us, we forgive them. It's quite all right. And we go deep into meditation. We feel the presence of the divine with us all the time. We see the Lord shining in our hearts. And we envision this state, and sometimes we may imagine ourselves to be like that. And then we come face to face with the hard knocks of reality when somebody says an unkind word to us, and immediately we flare up and we're ready to strike a blow, if not a blow with a fist, at least a blow with a sharp retort of the tongue. So we find that there's a disconnect between our conception of ourselves as perfected and how we're actually living. So it is when we realize this, when we see this disconnect, that we start to really work on ourselves and to try to address this fire, these flames that flare up within when we find that they are obstructing us in our spiritual life. And I think the very root of all this fire within, we will say it is craving, desire. I want. There's a very good story about this, which I think is appropriate to tell here, about King Yayati. In the Mahabharata, it's a long story. It's a typical soap opera, just like the soap operas on television today, it's got a cast of characters and they're telling lies and having strong passions and getting into all kinds of trouble because of these passions of theirs and these negative actions. And the cast of characters is, first, Shukracharya, who is the guru of the demons, and his beautiful and very attractive daughter, Devayani. And also the king of the demons, Vrishaparva, who is the rainy mountain peak or something, Vrishaparva. He's the guru of the demons. He's the king of the demons and the chief disciple of the guru, Shukracharya, and his beautiful and attractive daughter, Sharmishtha. And then, of course, King Yayati comes on the scene. So the girls, Devayani and Sharmishtha, and all the other young girls of the kingdom, they're all friends, and they go for an outing in the forest, and they go find a secluded lake, and they go swimming there, and they're having a great time. And Indra, the king of the gods, he decides to mix things up a little bit, so he comes and takes the form of wind, and all their clothes, which are lying on the bank of the lake, as the wind, he mixes them all up into one big pile. So when the girls come out of the lake and they go get their clothes, they are grabbing their clothes, and Sharmishtha, the daughter of the king of the demons, she puts on Devayani's cloth by mistake. And Devayani is not amused. She is in fact very much offended that Sharmishtha, who is the daughter of her father's disciple, so in a sense she is also her disciple, she should put on her cloth. And so she speaks some unkind words to her, saying, how dare you you are like my pupil, how dare you put on my cloth? But Sharmishtha doesn't take things lying down. She flares right back and she says, oh yeah? But it's your dad who's the beggar. He's sitting at the feet of my father who's the king, and like that. So she says very unkind words. And so it goes back and forth. Devayani then starts tearing at the cloth, And Sharmishta throws her into a well. There's a dry well there. There's no water in the bottom. She throws her into the well, leaves her there, and they all leave, leaving Devayani, perhaps dead, we don't know, at the bottom of a well. So enter King Yayati, the handsome, noble, unmarried king, who's out on a hunting expedition, and he's looking for water. He's thirsty, and he finds this well with a young girl at the bottom of it, so he helps her out of the well. And then he goes on his way, wisely goes on his way. Devayani is completely disconsolate. Her father comes to finds her in the forest sitting under a tree. She's explains to her father how terribly mean and nasty Sharmishta was. She's unwilling to accept it. At first, her father is trying to convince her, oh, it's all right, anger is not good, we just forgive and forget. But she eventually convinces her father, the guru of the demons, that she has been terribly slighted, and so has he, and he also becomes angry, and they decide they're going to leave the kingdom. Now, this would be very inauspicious for the demons, especially for the king of the demons, to have driven away his guru. So they come running, and they come begging forgiveness. And finally, Devayani says, all right, under one condition, Sharmishta will be my servant maid for the rest of our lives. So Sharmishta agrees to it, because what else can they do? They have to avoid the calamity of having insulted the guru. And so there they are. Life goes on as before, except that now Sharmishta is the servant girl, as it were, of Devayani, and has to massage her feet and all those things. And there again in the forest on a fine summer day, enjoying the beautiful weather, and King Yayati happens along there and wonders, who are these two beautiful girls? And to make a long story short, Devayani wants him for her husband and proposes to him. He says, it's impossible. You're a Brahmin, I'm a Kshatriya. It can't happen. Devayani sends for her father. Her father comes and convinces Yayati that there will be no harm. You can marry my daughter. So Yayati marries Devayani. But Shukracharya tells him, be happy, just don't touch Sharmishta. Of course, we know what happens next, right? So they live happily, not happily ever after. They live happily for some time. Sharmishta gets her own house, specially built house in the grove, and King Yayati is with Devayani, and she bears him 2 sons. And then one day, Yayati is strolling in the garden alone, and Sharmishta approaches him and explains that, well, she is without any children, shouldn't she also have children? And convinces Yayati that he should be the father of her children. After all, I am Devayani's slave, and you are Devayani's master, so I am your slave, and the master should grant children, sons, to his slaves, and like that somehow convinces him that he can get away with it. So he does, and she ends up bearing him 3 sons, Sharmishta. And Devayani, of course, seeing her friend and maid with children, asks, what's going on? What terrible sin have you committed? And she says, no, a rishi came to me. A holy rishi came and granted me the boon of sons. It wasn't anything improper. So she believes her, and life goes on. And one day they see these beautiful children, these 3 young sons that look quite a lot like King Yayati. And Devayani asks them, oh, you're beautiful children, where are you? Who is your father? And they point to Yayati. Of course, she's livid, and she feels utterly betrayed, and she runs to her father, and her father, very angry, curses Yayati. You will become old. Decrepitude will overtake you, and you will now be an old man. And as the words are leaving his mouth, his hair turns gray, wrinkles come over his face, he becomes hunched over. He's an old man. And he's crestfallen. He explains, but sir, I wasn't yet finished with my youth. I wasn't yet finished with enjoyment. I wasn't yet finished with enjoying your beautiful daughter. And what can the sage do? He says, I'm sorry, we sages, whatever we speak comes true. There's no way to take it back. There's no way for one of these sages to take back their curse. But He offers him one way out. If someone will exchange their youth with your old age, then you can have their youth. So Yayati accepts that, and he goes, surely one of his 5 sons will agree to exchange his youth for his father's sake. Of course, 4 of them are entirely unwilling. They're also not ready to become an old man. But the 5th son, Puru, he's a good boy. Okay, Dad, I accept. I accept your proposal. He explains, you see, I'm not yet satiated with youth. So Puru agrees, grants his father. They exchange youth and old age, as only can happen in these ancient epics. And so Yayati has a young body again, and he's a king with a beautiful wife, and all the means at his disposal for enjoyment, from beautiful palaces and hunting parties and dancing maidens and the best music that money can buy, the best food and everything, and he goes on enjoying to his heart's content. And I forgot to mention, the stipulation is for 1,000 years. With his son, there's an exchange of youth and old age for 1,000 years, and then it'll revert. So he's going on enjoying, and 1,000 years is an awfully long time, so he's having a great time. But even 1,000 years comes to an end one day. So this 1,000 years is coming to a close, and finally Yayati awakens. He gets some sense. He realizes that though he was enjoying for 1,000 years, that desire has not left him. He still is craving for more. And he speaks this truth in a very famous Sanskrit verse. Najatu kama kamanam upabhogena shamyati havisha krishna vartmeva bhuya evabhivardhate. O my son, never is desire stilled, never is desire subdued through enjoyment of desire. It doesn't happen. It only flares up like pouring ghee onto a fire. In those days, the main worship actually was offering ghee into the sacrificial fire. And the fire is hungry. And you pour ghee into it, and what happens? It burns that ghee and flares up all the more. So he has this realization. If one becomes the sole Lord of all the earth, with all its crops, all the precious gems, all the animals and all the women, still it would not be enough. It would not be enough. Therefore, he says, the thirst for enjoyment should be abandoned. And unlike a soap opera, it does have a happy ending. Yayati, of course, returns the youth to his son and becomes an old man again and puts his son on the throne and retires to the forest and performs intense spiritual disciplines and ends up going to heaven. So that's the happy ending to the story, that he comes to his senses, he realizes. See, what was the mistake that Yayati made, which is the same mistake we all make, which is that we equate pleasure and satisfaction of desire with real joy, with real peace. We think the two are the same. They are not. We are all like Yayati, chasing after that elusive satisfaction. I love all the drama in this story, because it really reflects our lives. Our lives become like this. Why? What is the cause? It all boils down to these same passions and uncontrolled angry responses that have repercussions for thousands of years in the cases of these stories. And even in the world we see thousands of years of repercussions from an angry action which leads to a war, which changes the course of history. So let's look a little at the psychology of desire. Where does desire come from? The Vedanta teachers call this tendency to repeat something, to want to repeat something, a samskara. It's a tendency of the mind. And how is it made? It's made by repeating an action, repeating a thought, repeating an action. We form a samskara, like a groove in a record. And the needle will always flow in that groove. It's a groove in the mind, and the mind will continually flow in that samskara, that groove. So we want something. We fulfill the desire for it. A piece of chocolate. Often we use this example. It doesn't mean chocolate is bad or that it's a simple way because it's a simple desire. So many of our desires are so complex. It's a simple desire. I want a piece of chocolate. I eat it. I feel some satisfaction. I feel some joy. And what happens? A little while later, I want another piece of chocolate. And already that habit, that groove has been formed. I want, I take, I eat, I get satisfied. So what is that desire? It's a kind of agitation in the mind. An agitation which says, I want to experience some pleasure, whether it be pleasure of owning something or pleasure of gaining some respect or pleasure of some physical pleasure. It's an agitation. And as that agitation gets stronger, that itself is a form of enjoyment, as we anticipate enjoying that which we're going to enjoy. So that perhaps we want let's take an example of, say we want a Tesla Roadster. Beautiful car, fast, electric, doesn't pollute. It's a wonderful thing. And we want it. Well, they're pretty costly. So we have to save up. We work overtime maybe. We save our pennies. And gradually we start thinking about how we're going to be driving. We're going to be the envy of all the neighbors driving this beautiful car. And for somebody else, it might be that diamond ring with the rubies around it. It's whatever it is that is your heart's desire. And so this agitation gets stronger, and we begin to anticipate. And finally, after a long time and hard work, we get the car, or the ring, or the house, or whatever it is, or the job. And we feel happy. We feel peaceful. We got it, finally. The mind is stilled. Vedantic teachers ask us to analyze and examine the nature of this joy that we're feeling when we satisfy that desire. Where does it come from? Is it in the object? No. It's welling up out of our own deepest being. It is the very nature of who we are as pure joy and bliss. But that knowledge of who we are is covered up by a restless mind, by so many desires, by ignorance of our true nature. When the mind is stilled for a moment, that joy bubbles up. That's the joy of our true nature. The sages of the Upanishads, the ancient seekers and seekers since time immemorial, have been making the remarkable and astounding discovery that our true nature is of the very nature of peace and bliss. The thrilling words of the Taittiriya Upanishad. Ananda is bliss, no? And the young Bhrigu approached his father and asked him, teach me this Brahman which you're talking about, which is the ultimate reality, which is the very basis of all that is. So what is that? Teach me that. And of course, Bhrigu, Varuna, his father, knows that you can't just teach it in words, you have to experience it. So he sends his son to do intense spiritual disciplines, again and again sending him to do more disciplines. And finally, he discovers that Brahman, that which is the very basis of our being and the basis of everything, is bliss, Ananda. Anando Brahmeti Vyajanat Anandadhyeva khalvimani bhutani jayante anandena jatani jivanti anandam prayantyavisamvishanti te. Thrilling verse from the Taittiriya Upanishad. He realized that Ananda, bliss, is Brahman. For from bliss are all these beings born. When born, in bliss they live, and into bliss do they enter at the end. So this is for the God-realized souls, the enlightened souls. They realize everything is bliss. What about for the rest of us? The Upanishad also has a very insightful comment about this. On a particle of this bliss, everybody else lives. On one particle. Etasya eva anandasya anyani bhutani matram upajivanti. On just a particle, those of us who have been separated, as it were, from our true nature by ignorance, there's a covering of ignorance, so we consider ourselves as separate from Brahman, as separate from that bliss. So we subsist, we live for just a little fraction of that bliss which comes through the experience of this world, through the contact of our sense organs with sense objects. The mind is stilled at that time and we experience a little particle of that bliss. So what is it then really that we want? What is it that we really truly want? What we want is that which we are, which we already are. We want that bliss which we already are, only we're looking for it in all the wrong places. And this is the parable of the Musk Deer. There's a certain kind of deer in India, Kasturi mriga, the deer which produces the scent called musk, which is turned into incense and perfume. And this deer has a gland in its navel, which produces this substance which has intoxicating fragrance and highly prized by those who prize such things. This deer smells this delightful fragrance coming from somewhere and wants to find the source of it. And it starts running through the forest. Where is it? And it runs to the tops of the mountains, and it runs to the deepest canyons, and it runs into the open valleys, and it runs to the river banks, and it searches everywhere for the source of this intoxicating fragrance, and it can't find it anywhere. All along, that fragrance was coming up out of its own being, out of its own navel. We are like that musk deer, searching for the bliss that is already our true nature. When we realize this is a wonderful realization. If we can realize this and really feel it, really realize it, half of our task is done. Then we know that it's not out there that we're going to find any bliss, any joy. It's in here that we're going to find it. Rather than seeking out in this world for satisfaction, know that we will find it when we turn within. So we are called to address this fire and that is burning us and find out its source, and then we can redirect it. Sri Krishna, the master psychologist, in the Bhagavad Gita, he explains how this desire arises. And this is a key verse to understand both the psychology of desire and the psychology of how to overcome it. He says, Dhyayeto vishayam pumsaha sangaste shupajayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodho bhijayate. Okay, what a person thinks of, that on which you think, attachment to that thing arises in your mind. attachment to that thing that you think, those things we think of, attachment arises in our minds. And what is that thing which we all think about most of all? What is the thing we think about most of all? This body, this body, myself. Because in Vedantic idea, this is just a vehicle. This body is just an object of my experience. Just like these other bodies are also objects of my experience, this is also an object of my experience. Then, from that attachment arises desire, kama. Then, from desire, what happens if that desire is obstructed, is thwarted? Anger. Anger. So the root of anger is desire. And then there's a second verse, he goes on. Krodhat bhavati sammoha, sammohat smriti vibhramaha, smriti bhramshat buddhinasho, buddhinashat pranashyati. A severe warning. From anger arises delusion. We get confused. And from this confusion, our memory fails. We fail to remember the lessons of our past experience. We know from experience that when we're angry and we write an email, it always ends up going wrong. We know it. Right now, we all know it. But when we're angry, we forget. We forget. This loss of memory, from this loss of memory comes the ruin of the buddhi, ruin of that faculty which decides, which helps us decide, do this, don't do that. This is good, this is helpful for me, this is unhelpful for me. That is ruined. And from the ruin of that, we are lost. We're gone. We send the nasty email. It gets to the boss fires us. We end up on the street. It goes on and on like that. So, and what's the source? What's the source? We trace it all back to thought. Just a thought. Thinking of objects. Attachment grows. From attachment comes desire. From desire comes anger, and anger brings in its train these steps which we're lost. Now we can stop this at any point, but the easiest is to stop it at the root. As Vivekananda says, we are what our thoughts have made us. So take care of what you think. Take care of what you think. So I think you can see how it's a key to understanding anger. It's also a key to understanding how to overcome anger. If we think of Teslas and diamond rings, we're going to have desire for Teslas and diamond rings. If we think of God, on the other hand, if we, as spiritual seekers, we try to think of God, the more we think of God, the more attachment to God arises in us, and the more desire to attain God arises in us. So we see how we can reverse it in this direction. Now, someone may object, okay, Swami, I see how if we want the Tesla and then somebody smashes my Tesla and I get angry, I had desire for the car, someone steals it, I can see how that's a frustrated desire. But say someone speaks some nasty words to me. How is that a frustrated desire? They insult me, I get angry, that's normal. I get angry. Where's the frustrated desire there? It boils down to, as I understand it, it boils down to a desire to maintain this illusion of me. This illusion of me. I, who am Swami Mahayogananda, the lecturer and singer, I am such a person. I should be highly respected. I should be pampered. I should be paid lots of money. I should be all these things. That's what we have. We connect all these desires to this false self who we think we are. And this project, as it were, to maintain what we imagine ourselves to be as a separate entity, consumes a tremendous amount of energy, a tremendous amount of desire connected with protecting this false self, this unripe ego, as Sri Ramakrishna used to call it, which thinks so much of itself. We are again making this mistake. We are looking to find permanence in what is impermanent, this impermanent body and this flawed personality. So this tremendous energy, can we harness that? Can we harness that and turn it towards the divine? The energy is tremendous, and here I would like to tell a fascinating story from my childhood. It's not about me, actually, it's about my sister. She doesn't remember this story, by the way. I asked her about it, but Mom remembers, and she can tell us more about it later. Mom and sister were going shopping. Sister was 4 years old, and they were at Sears, Roebuck and Company, the department store, and whatever don't know what was on the shopping list, but my sister happened to see a toy. It was a toy telephone, I believe. A toy telephone. She's 4 years old. She sees the toy telephone. She wants it. Mom, I want that. No, we don't need that. You don't need it. No, I really want that. I want it. And she wanted it so much, my mother said no. She ended up having a huge meltdown right there on the floor of the Sears, Roebuck and Company, screaming her head off, tears flowing down her cheeks because she had to have this little toy. And fortunately for her, my mother was a wise mother and did not give in to her demand, so she gradually learned that you can't have everything you want. And so otherwise, if you give in to these things, as parents know, I'm sure, you're just setting yourself up for more trouble. But see the power, that intense desire. There is something of that little girl in each one of us that just screams, I gotta have it. Tears streaming down the face. I want. Yes. And what is that I want? I want. Really what I want is that infinite bliss which lies deep within me. That's what we all really want. So, make it conscious. Make it conscious. This is the essential step, recognizing that all our craving is actually craving for the infinite, and that the infinite is to be found right here. Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna would say, quoting from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, that wonderful text full of his conversations and doings, one cannot completely get rid of the 6 passions, he says, lust, anger, greed, and the like. Therefore, one should direct them to God. If you must have desire and greed, then you should desire to love God. Be greedy to attain Him. If you must be conceited and egotistic, then feel conceited and egotistic, thinking that you are the servant of God. You are the child of God. You are the devotee of God. So we see how Sri Ramakrishna takes these problems we have, these passions, and says, just redirect them. Earlier King Yati realized that, we should just give up desire. And that's all very well and good to say, but we know how difficult it is to give up desire. Just to give up desire and be desireless, for us, let's face it, it's impossible. We're not going to be able to go beyond desire. But we can redirect that desire, redirect it to God. We make it conscious and ripen that ego which says, instead of saying, I am such an important person, I should be respected and paid and all of that, to the ego that says, I am a devotee, I am a humble servant of God. Sri Ramakrishna would say, it's such a fitting image of take a mango, which when it is unripe, it is green, it is very hard, like a stone, and if you're able to cut it and taste it, it's very sour. And who wants to eat a hard, sour mango? But ripen it, and it becomes so soft and sweet. So we place it on the windowsill in the sunshine of devotion. And maybe sometimes we put fruits in a paper bag to ripen them all the faster. We put that mango in the paper bag of meditation when we close everything down, of meditation. And that mango, that ego, becomes soft and sweet. Swami Turiyananda, one of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, he approached Sri Ramakrishna and asked him. He was a monk, obviously, so he asked him, "Sir, how can I get rid of lust?" He was going to be a monk. He knew this was something he would have to address. And Sri Ramakrishna told him to increase it. He says, I'm quoting here, "Sri Ramakrishna once told me to increase my lust." He was shocked, utterly shocked. What? I was shocked. Then the master explained, he says, "What is lust? It is the desire for fulfillment. It is the desire to get. Desire fulfillment in Him, desire fulfillment in God, and intensify that desire." And Turiyananda related that it worked. For him, he said, "Then the lust for flesh left me." So there's this tremendous power behind our desire, a tremendous power. We cannot get rid of it, and Sri Ramakrishna even says we should not get rid of it. Rather than trying to extinguish it, which is impossible and will be a waste of our energy, rather we take that energy and redirect it. Redirect it. So I think if we can develop 3 convictions, then we can really put this into practice in our lives. First, that craving, desire, this I want, and the resultant other passions which accompany that craving are like a fire in which I am burning. They are not helpful for me, and taming this fire is a good thing. That would be the first conviction, that there is this fire and I need to address it. The second conviction, that my true nature is bliss, is peace, is love. That wonderful song, we sang it last night. Remind me, my Lord, remind me, my Lord, remind me, my Lord, who I am. I am peace. I am joy. I am bliss. So if we can develop this conviction, the ancient sages and saints have affirmed it, the saints and sages of just the other day, like Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, have affirmed it. Even the Swami Mahayogananda even says so. Bliss is our true nature. Second conviction. And third, I can know it. I can experience it by taming the fire. Let's turn to the Gita again. Sri Krishna explains the kind of happiness that we are striving for, and the kind of confusion we get when we strive for the wrong kind of happiness. He says there are different kinds of happiness. Chapter 18 of the Gita, and the kind of happiness, the kind of joy that most people in the world are getting, and most of us are running after most of the time, it is like this. At the beginning, it tastes like nectar, but at the end, it tastes like poison. Vishayendriya sanyoga yattadagre mritopamam pariname vishamiva tatsukham rajasam smritam. What does it come from? It comes from the connection of our sense organs with the objects. It tastes like nectar at the beginning, like that piece of chocolate, or really the example which is most apropos, I think, it's a tragic example, is the example of drug addiction. Drug addiction they say that people who are addicts of some of the strongest drugs, they're ever in quest of that first high. The first time they took the drug, that experience was so sweet, so blissful. And then, of course, it tasted like nectar. And then, of course, the experience wore off, and they end up down in the dumps, and they're craving to experience that again and again. And yet, they find that the second time they take the drug, the third time they take the drug, each time, that high, that bliss is not quite as good, not quite as sweet as it was the first time. I'm going by, there was a recent Time magazine dedicated to opiate addiction. And this is what they say, that first high, they never can quite reach that state again. So how is it like poison? Addicts don't want to be addicts. They're caught in this craving from which they can't escape. It's a poison. It's a deep poison. So this kind of happiness, which is nectar at the beginning and poison at the end, this is one kind of happiness. But the kind of happiness Sri Krishna presents to us as what we should strive for, it is, first of all, he says, we learn to enjoy it by practice. We learn to enjoy it by practice, and it brings us to the end of suffering. But at the beginning, it tastes like poison. At the end, it tastes like nectar. See, the mirror, it's the mirror image of the rajasic happiness, which tastes like nectar at first, but like poison at the end. This tastes like poison at first, and yet like nectar at the end. Why? Poison at first because we have to discipline the mind, the mind which is so accustomed to gratifying every desire as soon as it arises, to taste that little bit of nectar, which is that little particle of bliss. We have to say, no, infinite bliss lies within you, O mind. Hold back, restrain. Train the mind. So it takes discipline. This tastes like poison at first. But it brings us to immense joy. Wonderful, wonderful joy. The joy of self-mastery, to be a master of our own minds. And gradually, we begin to taste the nectar of our true being and be established in who we really are. So I think if I would say anything about little practical hints, I was just talking about this idea of training our minds. And one area we can really, it's not so hard to train, is this one, the tongue. Many of us, we get into a habit of eating unconsciously. We want, say, the perfect example is watching a ball game and eating. And how many people watching the ball game are actually conscious of what they're putting in their mouth? The hand is moving and the tongue is tasting, but it's become automatic. There's some little niggling something. Eat some chips, eat some popcorn, drink some soda pop, drink some beer. And so we go on doing that, so make it conscious. All right, there's nothing wrong with drinking soda pop and, well, not too much wrong, but eating popcorn, say. Nothing wrong in eating popcorn, but let us do it consciously. If I'm going to eat popcorn, I shouldn't do it unconsciously. I should do it consciously. And we can choose to eat those foods which lead to good health for the body rather than bad health for the body. And the amazing thing is that though those foods first taste like poison, those French fries slathered with mayonnaise and ketchup, they really taste like nectar, but they're really not very healthy for the body. And that sprout salad, I speak from personal experience. After a while, the sprout salad starts to taste like nectar. It does. It really does. Sri Krishna's not lying. Even in the area of sprout salad. I eat sprout salad every morning for breakfast. I have some sprouts. Swami Sarvadevananda joins me. Nobody else at the table. They don't know what they're missing. So like that, we train the tongue, we train the eye, what things we bring into the mind through the eye. Do we watch a shoot 'em up movie before we go for our evening meditation? How good will our meditation be? What if we use that time instead to read some inspiring book before we go for our evening meditation? Then, anger. A couple of practical hints. I think the essential attitudes to cultivate with anger are patience and forgiveness. But in accordance with what we've talked about today, when we feel angry, look within. Why am I angry? Because we've learned today that we're not angry because of what somebody else did. We're angry because of some desire that's been obstructed. Look for that desire. Look for what is the real source of that anger. Seek the roots. And recognize that expressing anger, acting while angry, it generally doesn't bring good results. Finally, this fire, which is this fire of desire, turn it into the fire of longing for God. Sri Ramakrishna says that longing for God is the one essential and probably the only necessary ingredient in our spiritual life, longing. Everything else will fall into place if we have that, if we can learn to want God. How are we to want God? Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of the disciple who asks his teacher, what kind of longing should we have for God? Come with me. And they go for a dip in the river. They go for their bath in the river, and they wade out into their waist. And then the disciple, of course, to have a proper bath, you should go under the water. So he dunks down, and the guru places his hand right on his head and pushes him, keeps him pushed down underwater. And he's wondering what's going on. Guru's hand is on my head. He starts to push up against the hand, and Guru keeps his hand on the head, and he starts to feel like, I really need a breath of air. And Guru is still pushing, and gradually he's really struggling. He begins to struggle to come up for a breath of air. Then Guru lets him up, and he's panting for breath and kind of confused. And Guru asks him, how did you feel? I was dying for a breath of air. Like that. Dying for a breath of the air of God, of the air of the divine. I'd like to close with an email that we received recently, which is along the lines of our talk today, though not exactly along the lines, but the oldest monk of our order, he just left the body a few days ago. He was staying in our monastery in Kankal in Haridwar, the gateway to the Himalayas, and he was 105 years old. And one of the visiting monks wrote about him. He had met him just before he left the body. And interestingly, his name was Swami Akamananda, which means the bliss of being desireless. Akama. Kama is desire. Akama is desireless. His name is Swami Akamananda, the bliss of desirelessness, of that state of being without any desire. So this monk writes, revered Swami Akamanandaji, who was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Akhandananda's disciple. Revered Swami Akamananda Maharaj of Haridwar Ramakrishna Mission Ashrama made his final sankalpa, that means his final intention or determination, to give up his body. He told this just 2 days ago. Sadhus, the monks here, are saying that he announced long ago that he would leave the body consciously at his will, and he is now doing exactly as he said. He is neither taking food nor drinking anything for the last 2 days. Fully aware internally, he is now totally indrawn but highly alert. He is responding to every question that is being asked to him now, but saying that he is going to leave this world very soon. His face lights up with extraordinary joy and flashes a divine smile when he hears the word Ananda from us, when he hears the word bliss. Absolutely conscious, the miracle monk with Vedantic words on his lips. The word Ananda, bliss, is his favorite word all through. What a sight! On the 1st of June, he stepped into 105 years of age. On the 2nd, he announced his willingness to have complete withdrawal, and from the 3rd, he stopped all food intake, including liquids. He is lying on his bed with no disease, fully aware, floating in the bliss of Brahman. And on June 5th, he left the body. Thank you. Om Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutaha Stunvanti Divyaistavai Vedai Sangapada Kramopanishadai Gayanti Yam Samaga Dhyanavastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyantanna Vidu Surasuragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Our salutations to him who is the truth of life and existence, and whom the sages call by various names. Our salutations to him whose glory is sung in the sacred hymns of the various scriptures of the world, but whose limitless and infinite grandeur no mortal mind can comprehend. Our salutations to him on whom the devotees meditate in the shrine of their hearts and realize his ineffable presence in their deepest contemplations. May he illumine our understanding and prompt our minds to the path of truth and righteousness. May he reveal himself unto our souls and dispel the gloom of delusion, fear, doubt, and darkness. Om, peace, peace, peace. I thank you for